Guyana's chief elections officer arrested. Tonight, Keith Lowenfield's attorney, Nigel Hughes, speaks out. A surge in domestic abuse affecting as many as 1 in 3 Caribbean women. We'll talk to the president of the National Organization of Women of Barbados about this alarming situation. Jamaican Member of Parliament Lisa Hanna announces her candidacy for president of the People's National Party. Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister addresses the United Nations, saying the coronavirus presents a threat of unmatched proportions. Guyana and Jamaica record an increase in new cases and new deaths from COVID-19. At-home classes set to resume for students in Jamaica. We'll have the details. And the island of Barbados is updating its travel protocols for visitors.
This is the Caribbean Times News with Alicia Davis.
I'm Alicia Davis in New York. Thanks for being with us. We begin with our headline story. Guyana's chief elections officer arrested. Keith Lowenfield is out on bail after being arrested and questioned by police. It's part of an ongoing investigation into alleged electoral fraud. Now, Lowenfield is already facing criminal charges for alleged misconduct in public office and fraud. We spoke with Mr. Lowenfield's attorney, Nigel Hughes, about the arrest. Mr. Hughes, do you feel that your client is being singled out here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt. This investigation wasn't even triggered by a complaint to the Guyana Police Force. When the private criminal charges were brought, we pointed that fact out to the magistrates at the time. And we indicated that there hadn't even been a complaint against him to the police, who were the persons who were responsible for taking taking complaints of this nature. And that this was a private citizen who clearly was affiliated to a particular political party that had brought those charges. And what has happened now is that without a complaint, the DPP has taken over that case and has launched an investigation. No attempt has been made to address the other issues where there have been clear allegations of impropriety in the conduct of the elections, like, for example, deceased people voting, people who are out of the country voting. So it's clear that this investigation is not intended to be an unbiased investigation into the entire electoral process, but seems to particularly target people who are perceived as being on one side of the political fence.
And we will have much more with Nigel Hughes coming up later in the show. Now to Jamaica, where Member of Parliament Lisa Hanna has announced her candidacy for president of the People's National Party.
In 2020, we have received the resounding messages to be and to become better. It is therefore time for us to look forward, bring back the love, tear down the walls of division, and instead build bridges of human connection and understanding. This must be done with the people, where together we will build a future for Jamaica.
If successful, Ms. Hanna would be the second woman to lead the party, the first being former Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller. Well, turning to Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister addressing the United Nations, Dr. Keith C. Rowley told the UN General Assembly that the coronavirus pandemic presents, quote, an existential threat of unmatched proportions. In his address, he also spoke about security, the harmful effects of climate change, and the participation of women in agribusiness and tourism.
We will also continue to encourage the participation of women in agribusiness, agriculture, and tourism, as we remain seized of the fact that women not only undertake the role of ensuring that their families receive the nutrition they need to be healthy, but are sometimes the breadwinners. As a small island developing state, Trinidad and Tobago remains at high risk of being affected by the harmful effects of climate change, which have already been manifested in coastal erosion resulting from the rise in sea level. In this regard, our country continues to place emphasis on multi-pronged approaches for future adaptation to and mitigation of climate change.
Now to the death toll in Guyana and Jamaica from the coronavirus. The number of deaths in Guyana climbed to 78 as of Sunday after 2 men and 2 women, all residents of Region 4 and all under the age of 55, died while receiving care at a medical facility. Guyana has recorded 37 deaths so far in the month of September. Meanwhile, Jamaica has recorded 1 additional COVID-19 related death and 163 new cases in just 24 hours. That brings the COVID-19 death toll there to 89, with more than 6,000 total confirmed cases of the virus. Well, coming up after the break, a surge of domestic violence across the Caribbean. We are going to talk with the president of the National Organization for Women of Barbados about this alarming problem. And later in the show, we will have more on the arrest of Guyana's chief elections officer. Our interview with Keith Lowenfield's attorney is coming up.
Since the coronavirus, global travel seems risky. But with Promo Caribbean, you don't have to worry. Our COVID-19 alerts feature, coupled with our comprehensive travel guide featuring over 20 countries, contains all you need to keep updated and safe during the pandemic. Whether it's Belize, Barbados, Haiti, or Guyana, our travel guide has all you need from safe places to eat, transport options, pharmacies, embassies, hotels, and Airbnbs. Not feeling well? You could take the COVID self-assessment test on our app. If you happen to be in the Caribbean or are looking to travel during these uncertain times, then Promo Caribbean is going to be your best friend. Today more than ever, you need to stay informed and stay safe. With Promo Caribbean, you don't have to worry. We've got you. Download the app from the App Store or Play Store now.
Welcome back to Caribbean Times News. And a surge in domestic abuse during the pandemic. According to UN reports, 1 in 3 women in the Caribbean will experience domestic violence. Now, while lockdown measures are vital to halting the spread of COVID-19, being confined to their homes puts women and children at increased risk and cuts them off from essential protection services and social support. Well, we spoke with Marcia Hines, advocate and the president of the National Organization of Women of Barbados, about this alarming problem. Now, the numbers here are staggering. 1 in 3 Caribbean women will experience domestic violence, and that is before we had the pandemic to contend with. So please tell me, why are these rates so high, and what kind of abuse are we talking about here?
Thank you very much for having me. The numbers are indeed high, and the pandemic has taken us, to higher levels still. When you ask in terms of the numbers, I can give you some anecdotal information from what we would have dealt with as the National Organization of Women of Barbados during the pandemic. Unfortunately, however, we do not collect national statistics in Barbados. So I can't give you overall numbers, but for example, we were doing something that looked like 15 cases a week during the peak of the lockdown. And we were talking about all types of domestic violence. We saw financial abuse. Financial abuse looked like men who might have still been working, refusing to provide money to buy food, not allowing certain family members to be able to eat food or get access to resources like masks, that type of thing, financial and economic abuse. Of course, there was a traditional physical abuse. We saw women with, the usual injuries, hairline fractures, skin broken, so on and so forth. We also saw a rise in sexual abuse. And the reason for that is because a lot of the households in the Caribbean, in Barbados, as you would know or may know, there are several generations living together. And so with people on lockdown, you're talking sometimes about 12, 13 individuals sharing what is usually a small space. And so sexual violence was also on the rise. So we saw across the gamut of abuses occurring during the lockdown period.
I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what are the ways that this pandemic is putting women and children at higher risk for abuse. We know that they're all in there together, but what are some of the other ways that you're seeing?
So basically, one of the major reasons you will see an increase in abuse when there's a crisis, and in this case, the crisis was the pandemic, is that one of the major ingredients for domestic violence to happen occurs. And that major ingredient is isolation. So when people are in lockdown, they become isolated. It's a lot easier for a perpetrator to have control over the lives of his victim, and if they have children, of the children as well. So that is really what causes the increase during these pandemics, storms, those types of activities.
Right, cut off from social support, cut off from others who might intervene. And I wonder, are there any other problems for women that you're seeing as a result of this pandemic?
The major one would have to be joblessness. In Barbados, our biggest sector, as you would know, tourism, has been wiped out in a fell swoop. More women were employed in the tourism sector than men. There are more women in our job market in Barbados than men. So in the tourism sector, the joblessness is a significant issue. Whereas a woman is able to support herself and her children pre-pandemic, she's now a lot more dependent sometimes on, that abusive partner. Some partners have now become abusive where they were not abusive before, because it has a lot to do, the abuse has a lot to do with the power dynamics. So she has no job, there are not a lot of choices, and that situation in itself can give rise to abuse. So joblessness among women is a major issue that we're seeing. The fact that women are also burdened with unequally with care work. So women are expected now to do the online schooling with the children. They're expected, if they have elderly relatives, to be responsible. And like I just said, you're doing that in an environment where you don't have financial resource. So that as well is one of the major issues that's being caused for women coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so many women can relate to that. I know as a mother that I can. So what is your message to women who are experiencing this kind of violence? I mean, what can they do to protect themselves and their children?
Well, what my advice always is to women is that you have to sit with yourself and you have to ask yourself, what do you want? Because even as an advocate attached to the National Organization of Women, I do not get to choose what a woman wants to do. The reality of this situation is that there are reasons sometimes why women stay. And my job becomes to allow them to stay safely, or, in more of a safe way. And there are some women who want to get out. And so my first advice to women always is sit in a corner with yourself and get a sense of what you want. When you know what it is that you want, do not be afraid to reach out for help. You can contact, the various organizations in your country dealing with these issues. Of course, the police force should always be seen as a first resort. And I always tell women, if you go to the police and you don't get the response that you want the first time, because we're still dealing with some of the cultural issues, in Barbados and the Caribbean, do not let that daunt you. Ask to speak to a station sergeant, ask to speak to a senior, find out where your police headquarters is and go and make the report to the police headquarters if you're not getting attention in your district police station. I always tend to tell women friends are a good first point. So if you have a really strong friend that was in your life for a long time, that's usually a good place to start to look for support. Work is another good place. There are a lot of human resources departments now that understand the scourge of domestic violence, and women can actually reach out through work for assistance. Usually work has connections with groups like the National Organization of Women or other facilities. The clinic If you have to go to the doctor, that's another place that you can reach out for help. So really and truly, it begins with that woman saying what it is that she wants. And I always impress on individuals, do not force a woman to want a particular outcome. When we move women from domestic situations that have violence in them and the woman is not ready, usually they go back. And research tells you that is always, every time they go back, it's more dangerous. So we have to work with women and we have to support women to be able to come out, but we have to hear their voices. And so my first point to my clients always is listen to your own voice. What does it say? What does it want? And you move from there.
Listen to your voice and reach out for help. That was Marcia Hines, advocate and president of the National Organization of Women of Barbados. Now, coming up after the break, Guyana's chief elections officer arrested. We are going to talk to his attorney. And class will be back in session for Jamaica's students. We are going to have all the details on when and where those lessons are going to be coming up.
Mac Shack, New York. Dedicated to providing a unique dining experience by offering classic, seasonal, and modern creative macaroni and cheese flavors. Find their locations at macshacknewyork.com. That's MACSHACKNY.com.
Welcome back to Caribbean Times News. Guyana's chief elections officer, Keith Lowenfield, has been arrested as part of an ongoing investigation into alleged electoral fraud. Well, earlier today, we spoke to Mr. Lowenfield's attorney, Nigel Hughes, about the case. Mr. Hughes, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. And now, over the weekend, Guyana's chief elections officer and your client, Keith Lowenfield, was arrested and several charges were filed against him. Tell us what happened and what charges he's facing.
Right. So they haven't actually filed the charges. We anticipate that they're probably going to get there today, tomorrow. I understand that earlier this morning, the crime chief said the charges were going to be filed against him. What happened on Saturday was that on Friday afternoon, the crime chief contacted me, said that they wanted to speak with him. Before that, they had actually gone to his house for the purposes of arresting him. We turned up on Saturday morning about 10:30, and there were a series of questions that they put to him, and there was also a confrontation between one of the activists for the People's Progressive Party. A lady came and she alleged on her computation of the results, Mr. Lowenfield's conduct. He disclosed what she said was fraud. He was then placed on bail and invited to return this morning, which he did at 8:30, when they asked for a sample of his handwriting, which he declined to provide. And he has to return on Wednesday morning. The basis of this, of course, is that you know that the elections results are disputed. They are going to become the source of two court cases that have been filed so far. So there are two actions that have been filed to set aside the election results. And Mr. Lowenfield, who is the chief elections officer, no doubt is going to be a principal witness in that case, not necessarily for a party, but of course, the matters which were under his jurisdiction are going to become an essential part of the case. I suspect that the basis for this being done at this stage is that, one, given the trial is going to come up, they want to institute charges so that they will allege that by the time he comes to testify, he's facing criminal charges and allegations of criminal conduct. And also, after having filed the charges, I'm sure that there's going to be an application from the government commissioners to have him interdicted from duty. So the purpose of this is twofold. One, the interdiction from duty, so he can no longer act as chief elections officer going forward. And two, of course, they want to be able to say that he is facing criminal charges were he to testify in either of those election petition cases.
And so I'm trying to understand, what evidence did the Criminal Investigation Department uncover that they say has led to the police to detain him?
They didn't provide him with anything other than letters that they allege he wrote to the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission and responses that she gave to him. At the end of the day, the result that was declared was based on the results that he provided to the chairman. So it's very curious what they are doing.
And now, is jail time a real possibility here? And if so, how much time would he be looking at?
Well, the offenses for which he's been charged, and these are in the private criminal charges. They haven't actually filed any current charges by the state. Private criminal charges are brought by a private member of the public against him. Those are the existing charges that exist. Those are the existing charges. In the case of misconduct of public office, if that goes to trial on indictment, he can face up to life. In the case of the other two, he can face 10, 15 years. And
now, the opposite. I'm sorry, please. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. Please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask that the opposition party, the APNU, has alleged that the governing PPP committed fraud. So why hasn't anyone from the PPP been arrested?
Welcome to Guyana. Other than that, which is it sounds facetious, but it is welcome to Guyana, because there are clear cases where I know that there were death certificates that were submitted, and I understand that the immigration department also provided information that showed several of the people who purported to vote were actually out of the country on the day that they were alleged to have voted. That, to me, should properly form part of a criminal investigation. I do not know why it has not formed part of the criminal investigation. The police did not actually have a complaint in this case. What happened is, in the present case, was that one of the PPP persons who brought the private criminal action against Mr. Lowenfield, after we invited the Director of Public Prosecutions to review the charges, because when they brought them, they didn't have any witnesses, they didn't have any statements, they said they wanted to bring 188 people. And the Director of Public Prosecutions, by her previous conduct where a private criminal charge had been filed against the chairperson of GCOM, had withdrawn those charges within 2 to 3 days of them being filed. So in this case, the DPP has taken over the investigation, and rather than review what existed at the time when these private criminal charges were brought, she has now taken them over and invited the police to conduct an investigation, which was not properly her role, and that was certainly not what she was invited to do.
Now, Mr. Hughes, is there anything that you want the public to know about this arrest and this case?
Well, I think the arrest clearly is intended to intimidate Mr. Lowenfield, without a doubt. I certainly think, for the reasons I gave before, it's intended to move the commission to a position where they're going to indict him because they're pending criminal charges. They're well aware, with the number of witnesses they allege they have, that there's no way there will be an outcome of the criminal charges prior to the hearing of the Elections Commission case. So they know that when he goes to testify, the first thing they'll say, are you facing criminal charges? And then ask him about the nature of those charges. So clearly an attempt to indict his character at the time he testifies. And of course, they probably intend to move to have him interdicted from duty. This is just an ongoing saga. I'm sure your listeners are well aware of the deep divide in Guyana. It's been there forever. And the country is deeply divided. So as you can well imagine, this case is going to only further accentuate the very, very deep divisions that exist at the moment.
And now to another case that we are following closely, Breonna Taylor. New evidence showing that the ballistics report does not conclusively prove that the person who shot the officer was Breonna's boyfriend. Our legal expert, Eon Smith, is going to take a closer look and help us make sense of it all. That is coming up tomorrow, right here on Caribbean Times News. Well, just ahead, classes resume for Jamaica's students and an important update for travelers to Barbados. Stay with us.
Since the coronavirus, global travel seems risky, but with Promo Caribbean, you don't have to worry. Our COVID-19 alerts feature, coupled with our comprehensive travel guide featuring over 20 countries, contains all you need to keep updated and safe during the pandemic. Whether it's Belize, Barbados, Haiti, or Guyana, our travel guide has all you need, from safe places to eat, transport options, pharmacies, embassies, hotels, and Airbnbs. Not feeling well? You could take the COVID self-assessment test on our app. If you happen to be in the Caribbean or are looking to travel during these uncertain times, then Promo Caribbean is going to be your best friend. Today more than ever, you need to stay informed and stay safe. With Promo Caribbean, you don't have to worry. We've got you. Download the app from the App Store or Play Store now.
Mac Shack New York, dedicated to providing a unique dining experience by offering classic, seasonal, and modern creative macaroni and cheese flavors. Find their locations at macshacknewyork.com. That's MACSHACKNY.com.
Welcome back to Caribbean Times News. And at-home classes set to resume for Jamaica students. As coronavirus cases spike, the Ministry of Education is announcing that face-to-face lessons will be delayed, but at-home learning will begin October 5th. Students are going to be able to access their lessons virtually via television, radio, and cable, and through the delivery of printed materials. According to the Education Minister, approximately 20,000 teachers have been trained in use of the virtual system. And finally, in tonight's Caribbean Moment by Caribbean Journal, the island of Barbados announcing an update to its travel protocols for visitors. The biggest change features tightened testing requirements and required daily self-temperature checks throughout a visitor's stay. Barbados is going to require a negative COVID-19 PCR test within 3 days before arrival for all visitors from medium and high-risk countries. Now, those countries include the United States, France, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom, among others. Those visitors are going to be limited to the grounds of their hotel or their accommodations until they pass a second COVID-19 test 2 to 3 days after their arrival. The new protocols are going to take effect October 1st. And we want you to share your Caribbean moments with us. Send us your videos and your photos. You can direct message us on Facebook or Instagram at CaribbeanTimesNews.com. And for all the latest news updates, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Caribbean Times News. Well, that does it for this edition of Caribbean Times News. To all of our viewers all across the Caribbean and all around the world, thank you for watching and good night.